All parents must watch. This episode 1, The Hidden Shadows. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky painted in hues of gold and crimson. In the quiet suburb of Silver Oaks, the Adebanjo household was like any other, charming on the outside but holding secrets that no one would dare imagine. Inside, the house was unnaturally silent. Mr. Adebanjo, a successful entrepreneur, had been at his office since dawn, buried in spreadsheets and conference calls. His wife, Mrs. Adebanjo, spent her days managing her boutique, attending social events, and sharing pictures of her picture-perfect life on Instagram. Their 2 children, 16-year-old Tolu and 14-year-old Ayo, were left to their own devices, literally. Tolu sat in his room, his headphones blasting music as he tapped furiously on his phone. Ayo, on the other hand, was in the living room, scrolling through social media with an intensity that suggested he was searching for something more than entertainment. Their parents had no idea what their children were up to. For them, as long as grades were decent and the house was intact, everything was fine. The Adebanjo family appeared perfect to outsiders. They attended church every Sunday, hosted family dinners on special occasions, and were known for their generosity, but behind closed doors, cracks were beginning to form. Tolu, who used to be an obedient and cheerful girl, had grown distant. Her once bubbly personality had been replaced by a cold, guarded demeanor. She spent hours locked in her room, her phone her constant companion. Ayo, though quieter than his sister, had his own secrets. He often skipped homework and stayed up late chatting with strangers online. His fascination with video games had turned into an obsession with the dark corners of the internet, where he found communities that fueled his curiosity about things he knew his parents wouldn't approve of. It started small, missed meals, incomplete homework, and a lack of interest in family activities. But the Adebanjos brushed it off as typical teenage behavior. One evening, Mrs. Adebanjo noticed that Tolu's school uniform was wrinkled and her hair unkempt. "Tolu, what's going on? You've been so careless lately," she said while scrolling through her phone. "Nothing, Mom. I'm just tired," Tolu replied without looking up from her phone. Mrs. Adebanjo sighed but didn't press further. She had a client to call and an event to plan. That same night, Mr. Adebanjo walked past Ayo's room and noticed the light streaming from beneath the door. He considered knocking but decided against it. Boys will be boys, he muttered to himself and went to bed. The following week, the school principal called the Adebanjos for an urgent meeting. Tolu had been caught with inappropriate content on her phone during class. "We're deeply concerned," the principal said, her voice stern. "This behavior is not what we expect from our students." Mr. Adebanjo was furious. "Tolu, how could you embarrass us like this?" he demanded on the ride home. But instead of apologizing, Tolu remained silent, her face a mask of defiance. At home, Ayo sat in the living room, pretending to study but eavesdropping on the heated conversation. His sister's rebellion intrigued him. If she could get away with it, why couldn't he? Ayo's curiosity soon led him to darker paths. He began experimenting with hacking tools he found online, breaking into accounts and stealing information. At first, it was just for fun, but when one of his online friends suggested he try phishing scams for money, he hesitated for only a moment before diving in. Within weeks, Ayo had scammed hundreds of dollars from unsuspecting victims. The thrill was intoxicating, and the money gave him a sense of power he'd never felt before. But Ayo wasn't as clever as he thought. One of his victims traced the scam back to him and threatened to report him to the authorities unless he returned the money. Panicking, Ayo transferred the stolen funds back but didn't tell anyone about the incident. Meanwhile, Tolu's behavior grew more erratic. She started sneaking out at night to meet with an older boy she'd met online. He was charming and attentive, everything she felt her parents weren't, but his intentions weren't as pure as he claimed. One evening, Tolu didn't come home. The Adebanjos were frantic, calling her friends and the police. She returned the next morning, disheveled and tearful, refusing to say where she had been. "Tolu, this has to stop," Mrs. Adebanjo cried, her voice breaking. But Tolu's eyes burned with anger. "Maybe if you cared more about me and less about your boutique, I wouldn't have to find comfort elsewhere," she shouted before storming.